You heard that? We're recording. Let's see. Second. Perfect. All right, here we go. So recently we have all heard of the changes that are happening with the NAR settlement, right? There are a lot of big changes happening with buyer broker commissions, concessions. The way we're going to be doing business and working with buyers is completely changing. So, guys, this is going to be one of the most important classes we've had all year long. If you're in front of your computer, if you're in front of your phone, make sure you're up to date and staying tuned on everything we're going to be going over. So, Glenda, good to have you. Um, let's see.
Morning.
Good morning.
Perfect, perfect.
Morning, Linda.
Hola, everyone.
Hey, Glenda.
Hello.
Hello, Glenda. So, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Well, Fredo, I want to see that beautiful face of yours. Where you at? Same with you, JP.
I mean, just having it's you got me?
There we go. Perfect. Okay. So, NAR settlement and what does it mean for us realtors? So, first and foremost, let's go ahead and talk about why this is happening, right? Real estate has been going on for, this has been one of the biggest sectors in the US economy for a long time. And there are always kind of minor changes, but this is considered to be a major change. Now, March 6, 2019, Cohen Milston and a few other people counseling him filed a antitrust class action lawsuit in the northern district of Illinois on behalf of home sellers who paid a broker commission in the last 4 years connection with the sale of residential real estate listed on one of 20 multiple listing services. Now, I'm going to skip a lot of this information and go to the bottom, right? The reason why this lawsuit is going into action is because home sellers who listed their homes on one of 20 MLSs, they're bringing this action lawsuit against National Association of Realtors and the four largest national brokers, which is at the time was Realogy, Home Services of America, Remax, and Keller Williams, for conspiring to require home sellers to pay the broker representing the buyer of their homes and to pay an inflated amount in violation of federal antitrust law. Okay. To put that in simple terms, they're saying that they were almost forced into paying a buyer broker commission based off what's on the MLS, based off, what we even have in the listing agreements stating what are we going to offer for the buyer agent commission, right? Everybody knows that tab in the listing agreement that says, hey, this is what we're giving to the buyer's agent in commission. That is what they are fighting against. That is the big issue here in place. So, National Association of Realtors is making changes because of this, right? They are settled for hundreds of millions of dollars that need to be dispersed for this issue. Um, and now things are going to be changing drastically. So let's keep things moving. These are some upcoming important dates for all of us to consider. August 17th, 2024. So that's going to be less than a month from now. New NAR MLS policy implementation and the earliest class notice issuance. So, what does this mean? The very first thing on August 17th, we're not going to be having buyer agent commissions in the MLS. Okay. We're not going to see 2.5. We're not going to see 3%. We're not going to see anything that is coming from a tab of the MLS about buyer agent commission. Okay. September 16th, 2024, deadline to implement practice changes. And then November 26th is going to be the final approval hearing for the National Association of Realtor and this whole entire settlement, right? This thing is moving along, but August 17th is the soonest we're going to be seeing changes in this business. Okay. September 16th is when we could be seeing even more changes, and we're going to kind of go over a few of the changes that we can expect. So, updated practice and moving forward. This is only for residential real estate. This is not for commercial. Okay, this is not for any overseas deals, or this is strictly for residential real estate. Okay, for buyers, no offer of buyer broker compensation in the MLS. That's what we just kind of went over, the first part. The second thing, buyer agent must have signed compensation prior to showing properties. Is everybody hearing me there? Buyer agent must have signed compensation form, which is a buyer broker agreement, prior to showing any properties. Compensation may not be considered open, whatever the seller is paying, right? It needs to be very detailed and in the contract as well. There is no tab. You need to put it in additional terms, and we're going to go over some verbiage that we can put in the contracts. Services may not be offered as free unless there is no financial compensation from any source. So you can't say, hey, it's free to utilize my services, right? You know how we tell buyers right now? I told my seller yesterday, hey, when you buy, I work for you for free, right? We cannot say that anymore because we don't work for free. The buyers are paying us our commission. It's just coming through the hands of the seller to buyer concessions, and then the buyer pays us. Does that make sense? We do not work for free. The buyer does need to pay us, but we get those concessions from the sellers, correct? Everybody clear so far?
You can say anymore that we work for free for them,
No.
you say?
We cannot say we work for free because we don't. The buyers are paying our commissions. Okay. For
The
seller,
buyer through the seller.
the seller can offer buyer concessions that can be used for closing costs, that can be used for title, that can be used for points, and it can be used for buyer agent commission. Okay. Now, on the selling side, we're going to go deeper into this. Okay. But on the selling side, sellers may offer concessions via MLS that could include buyer broker compensation. So what is that going to look like? Because I just said no offer of buyer broker compensation in the
Brenda,
MLS.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, real quick, going back to you can't say you work for free. That's you can't say you work for free, offering like free, or that you can't help someone buy a home for free. But I can still say that I offer a free consultation.
Yeah.
I can still say
Yeah. Consultation's free.
offer you a free, get pre-approved for free,
Yeah.
pre-qualified for free. You can send like home lists. for free. I
Now
just
we're
can't-
gonna we're gonna get
so,
into that
right?
because that is gonna all be kind of packaged into the buyer broker agreement and what that means, right? And what that's gonna look like. All right. So technically, yeah, some of these things are free. We can get them pre-approved, and if they don't buy a house, they got pre-approved for free, right? But these are actions considered in the buyer broker agreement that we are responsible for, right? So technically, yes, but we'll get into that we'll get into that a little deeper. So sellers may offer concessions via MLS that could include buyer broker compensation. So there's not going to be a tab in the MLS that gives you, hey, buyer agent, this is your commission, 2.5%. But you could put verbiage in the realtor remarks stating that the seller may offer concessions for buyer broker compensation. Okay. Now, everything is negotiable here as well, right? So like if you're asking for closing cost, I'm already seeing some sellers saying, hey, we're already giving buyer concessions. Now your client wants closing cost. We're gonna have to take that. We're gonna take that out of buyer commission or concessions, right? That is something that can realistically happen, especially if there's a hot property that people are trying to negotiate the best deal for, right? But in the MLS, you can put in realtor remarks that seller may offer concessions to that for buyer broker compensation. The big word change here, it's not commission, it's compensation, because the buyers are compensating the buyer for the hard work that they're doing to find them the house and all the buyer broker duties. Second thing, concessions must be asked for in the contract, subject to open negotiations in the purchase contract. So when you write an offer, the concessions that you're asking for need to be in the contract, in the additional terms, in the cost to be paid by seller. That needs to be very clearly stated in the contract. Just because it says it in the MLS doesn't mean that it's concrete. They could offer seller concessions at 2.5% or 3% in the MLS. And then when it comes to contract, it's subject to open negotiations. Right? So if you're asking for 20K off the house and $10,000 in closing costs for your buyer, they could say, hey, okay, but I'm only going to pay you 1.5% commission, or I'm only going to give 1.5% buyer concession. That is open to negotiation. Okay. These are important things to start wrapping your brain around, because we're going to be, especially going into resale homes, if you're not selling new construction, these are some challenges we may be facing, because all of us, we always work to get our clients the best possible deal. That's something instilled within all of us within this team, right? So we might be getting pushback on buyer concessions when we're doing heavy deals or asking for heavy negotiations with buyers. Is that pretty clear? Okay. So whatever concession you're getting for your commission, whatever concessions you're getting needs to be in the contract.
And
Lorenzo,
I had a
can I-
question.
Yep.
Go
Sylvia.
ahead, Wilfredo. Okay,
No, you
so
go.
Renzo, Renz, so when we negotiate that concession or the compensation for the buyer's agent, we're putting it in that section where it says to be paid by the seller, right?
It could be, but I'd rather put it in additional terms just
I
so
do
it's
too.
clearly stated.
Okay. Or we
Yeah.
could put both, but if we did use that space, because I typically use that space for the transaction fee for the buyer,
Yeah.
$4.99. Okay, but if we do use, and I think I will still use that space for the transaction fee of $4.99, right? We can still use that space for that
Yeah.
transaction fee.
Yep.
Okay. But now on the seller, we don't have to use that space. So in additional terms, my biggest thing is how should it be worded?
I got
Am
you.
that's the biggest thing. And I could use AI to help me figure this
Oh,
out, but
hey,
I want
Sylvia,
it
I got
solid.
I have the verbiage for you, okay?
Okay.
I got you. I'm Alexis Diaz. I got you.
Yeah.
All right. JP, I see you shaking your head over there. All right. All right. So everything
Can I
pretty
jump
clear.
in?
Oh yeah, Wilfredo.
Based on everything you're saying, that we're gonna have to negotiate concessions with, as far as our commission, closing costs for our buyers. Correct me if I'm wrong, and if you guys see the things differently than I do. I think the first thing that I'm gonna negotiate is my commission. I'm gonna say this, whether it's 3, 2.5. I think that we negotiate our commission, and then they agree to that, and then we're open to a negotiation about the rest.
Yep.
That way our commission is stamped, and we move on past that once we come to an agreement.
And Wilfredo, that's an
Talking
amazing
conversation with the buyer or the seller about
With
your
the sell
commission.
the
with the
listing agent.
seller. Yes,
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
Listing agent.
So that's an amazing point. So one, when you call that listing agent, it's going to be even more crucial now that we call the listing agents before we start negotiations. Because we're gonna say, hey, we're gonna come, we might write you an offer, we're gonna negotiate, but I want you to know no matter what, if we do come to terms, my commission is X amount. If you guys, and also if they stated it in the MLS, hey, no matter what, my commission is X amount. I'm just letting you know this. Okay. So, Wilfredo, that's an amazing point. And it's something that we need to communicate with the listing agents very clearly from the start. Regardless of where we end up in price, in closing cost concessions, whatever it is, my commission is X amount. Okay.
5%.
So we're gonna recap this real quick. On the buyer side, no offer for buyer broker. It should say commission in the MLS. Buyer agent must have signed compensation prior to showing properties. Compensation may not be considered open, whatever the seller is willing to pay. Services may not be offered as free unless there is no financial compensation from any source. Sellers may offer concessions via MLS, which could include buyer broker compensation. Concessions must be asked for in the contract. So if you're writing an offer and you forgot to put concessions in there, your buyer broker concessions, you might be doing a contract without getting paid. So make sure you're putting your buyer broker the concessions or the buyer broker. That is subject to open negotiations, and then buyer agent may not be paid more than the pre-negotiated amount on the buyer broker agreement. So if you put 1%, you're getting paid 1%, even if they're giving 3%. For me, I'm gonna start doing 3%. And then I'm gonna do 3% because typically with resale homes, you're not gonna get anything higher than that. If you do find maybe a special deal where a home seller is offering 3.5%, then you rip up one buyer broker and get another one signed with 3.5%, right? Now things are gonna be different working with home sellers, working with home builders, right? Because we're gonna have commission or we're gonna have compensation forms working with home builders. And these are things that they already understand. And from what I'm hearing, all the builders are still going to be paying buyer broker concessions, which is good news. The settlement destroys procuring cause. Agents only get paid if they have a signed buyer or seller agreement. If you don't have a buyer broker agreement or a listing agreement, you are not getting paid.
Yeah.
That needs to be very clear. If you go to closing and you don't have a buyer broker agreement, you're not getting paid.
When exactly start this?
So this, if we go back to the timeline, there are gonna be certain things. One sec here. So this is where they're gonna start implementing the commissions in the MLS.
Okay.
September 16th is the deadline to implement all the new practices and changes. So I believe this is just stating in the MLS the new commission things. This is the deadline to implement practices and changes. And then this is November 26th is the final approving hearing. So
The final approval is for what?
the final approval is just finalizing the lawsuit. I'm not entirely well vetted in how lawsuits work. I've never been in one and I hope to never be in one, but I'm not very clear in, the way it's going to be kind of finalizing everything that they're looking to implement. But September 16th is a deadline to implement all practices and changes. So I would say at the very latest, September 16th is when all of this is going into action.
Okay.
Okay.
And even now, Renzo, EXP is already requiring a buyer broker agreement to close,
Yeah, we're
to
already
get paid, I should say.
Yeah, we're already doing it. All you
It's
guys are
kind
getting
of-
buyer broker signed for your contracts. So if you don't have a listing or buyer agreement, you're not getting paid. Okay. And Chriselle is very aware of this, and she's ready to shoot out buyer broker agreements whenever you need them.
I need one.
We all need one.
Yeah.
Stellar MLS enforcement. Okay. Enforcement of buyer agreement under the settlement local regional multiple listing services. Enforcement responsibility. The enforcement of having a buyer agreement will be managed by the local regional MLS. Upcoming rule changes. The first new requirement, a buyer agreement employment must be in place prior to opening the door to a property. Consequences of non-compliance. So, one second, I think I did a misspell here. But a buyer agreement must be in place prior to opening the door to a property. If not, you could have consequences of non-compliance. So, a buyer agreement must be in place prior to opening the door to a property. Everybody understood that? Loud and clear. Fines. Likely fines for not having a timely buyer agreement, similar to posting a for sale sign without a signed listing agreement,
Yeah. Mhm.
right? Loss of access. If you're just going rogue, you're not playing by the rules, if you're not taking this seriously, some MLSs may limit or restrict access to known or habitual violators. Financial impact, potentially having to return the commission fee if compliance is not met. Now, guys, my job is we never have to deal with any of this, right? We're never gonna go have any financial impact, loss of access for non-compliance with this buyer, with the new changes happening. Everything is gonna be implemented. We're all gonna have our buyer broker agreements, but these are some of the ways they are gonna enforce this if you're not doing what you need to do. Okay? What is a buyer broker? Identifying potential homes, arranging and showing homes, negotiating for our buyers, presenting buyers offers, and then all the other services that come into it. Right? This is the basics of what a buyer broker is. Wilfredo, you're doing this today. You're identifying potential homes. You already arranged your showings. If you find the right property, you're going to negotiate for that buyer. You're going to present that buyer's offer, and then you're going to have to do everything else. You're going to call title, you're going to call lender. This is what a buyer broker is. Okay? These are the pillar of services that we are offering. Next thing, market strategies.
Hey Renzo, before you
Yes.
continue, I know you're recording this. I'm at the hotel. My client's coming down right now, so
All right.
I gotta take out. So
Sounds good.
I'll check this video out when it's posted, but I'll talk to you guys later.
Okay.
All right,
Take care,
Bye.
Wilfredo. Hey, best of luck.
bye. Thank you, thank
Go
you.
get a contract, man. Go to LGI
We'll
Homes.
see. All right, brother. Talk to you later.
See ya.
Yeah, bro.
All right. What are your buyers' needs? Or what are the buyers in your market's needs? Now, we have one of the biggest blessings of working here in Central Florida is we have new construction, right? We're going to have buyer broker agreement per development, or we're going to have commission forms per development. So if we're doing new construction, we need to be very clear how we're getting this compensation. Chriselle is already on that. She's working with D.R. Horton. She's working with LGI Homes. We have all these deals happening, but these buyer broker agreements are still needed when working in new construction. Resort and second home, shortening the time frame with strategic follow-up. First-time home buyers negotiation strategies to purchase and leverage for the local market. VA buyers asking seller directly to pay buyer broker fee. Investors. But the biggest thing here is your paperwork aligned? Is your paperwork in sync with your buyer's needs? And this is where it gets interesting because we're going to be asking for 3% on all buyer broker agreements, right? But then we're going to have the situation of what if a buyer's or a seller's only offering 2.5%, right? So we have to have it in additional terms on our buyer broker agreements that in the event that the commission is 2.5%, or in the event that the seller is offering concessions at 2.5%, we will not charge the buyer the extra 0.5%. Okay. But these are things that you want to take into consideration. You know, working with new construction, we're going to have the compensation form. Maybe they might have a new form that comes out, compensation form, and potentially, yeah, but we still need a buyer broker agreement with new construction. So if you know you're going to be selling a D.R. Horton home, if you are getting 4%, whatever it is, you need to increase that buyer broker agreement that you have with the client, right? Or switch it out. So if you have a buyer broker agreement at 3% or at 3% commission, and then you go with D.R. Horton and you get like a special bonus 3% plus 5,000 or 4%, you need to get a new buyer broker agreement.
Oh,
Okay.
so the bonus, we have to account for the bonus on the buyer broker agreement.
Precisely. You
So
cannot
you
get paid
you
more
have to
than what your
start.
buyer broker allows. Buyer
So
broker
can we
agreement allows.
can we put something like up to a number?
Yeah.
So it covers it and I don't have to
You
keep
can't say
repeating.
you can't say up to. It needs to be very clear what you're being compensated. So
Oh,
in the beginning it
okay,
says no open pricing. It needs to be
okay.
very clear what you're being compensated for. So if it's 3%, it's 3%. But what you could easily do is scratch out that 3, put a 4, have it initialed by your buyers and yourself, and you're good to go. Right? You can make that quick change if you need to. But these are things that need to be considered and you need to be thinking about as well. Listing agent strategies. What should they expect? One, keep doing the same marketing. Two, compensation. So this is a different type of conversation with the sellers. Right now, we're not just saying, hey, I charge 5.5% and I give 2.5% to the buyer's agent. It's like, okay, hey, I charge 3% or 3.5%. And now we need to talk about what type of concession we're going to give for buyer broker. I'm not giving any commission to the buyer's agent. We're not splitting commissions. These are two separate things. These are two separate things that need to be stated in the contract, in the listing agreement as well. Okay? So we're not just talking about your commission. We're talking also about buyer concessions. Make sense? Is that
Yeah.
clear? Okay,
Yes.
Roger, eso es claro.
Little bit.
Okay. Cuando estás hablando con un vendedor, tú no puedes decir, mira, esto yo cargo 5.5 o 6% y después yo voy a dar 3% a la gente. Tú no puedes decir eso. Tú tienes que decir, mira, mi comisión es 3%. Y ahora tenemos que hablar cuánto concessions vamos a dar al buyer broker. So, no es el parte de mi comisión yo estoy dando. Ahora es dos diferentes cosas que
Okay.
tienes que hablar. ¿Ok?
Got it.
Nosotros no podemos compartir ningún comisión. ¿Ok?
Entiendo.
Perfecto. Again, contract negotiations, those are things you want to be clear on the listing appointment. And also finding out net proceeds, reach out to Julia at Magnolia or use the app that she has provided. These are just a few things, but the biggest change to our listing presentations is going to be talking about concessions when you're talking about your commission. Because we cannot give any part of our commission to the buyer's agent. It's a separate thing. Next thing, realtor marks for listings, and also contract verbiage. So Sylvia, here you go. The seller is willing to offer a buyer broker concession of X dollars, which can be applied towards the buyer's closing costs, prepaids, or other allowable expenses. Okay.
So, okay, so question for you. So really what we're talking about is concession to the buyer broker, not concession to the buyer. But
The seller is willing to
we
offer.
are negotiating the buyer concessions, but we're talking from the viewpoint of it going into the hands of the buyer broker, and then the buyer broker distributes it
No,
on paper at closing.
it's going to the buyer, and then it gets through our buyer broker agreement, some of that gets distributed. So no matter what, our buyer broker, our buyer is paying that fee. Okay? If we have a buyer brokerage agreement at 3%, the buyer is paying us at 3%. It's up to us to get that buyer broker concession from the sellers to the buyer. Because the buyers,
Hey, that's what I was saying. It comes from the hands of the buyer broker. The concession to the buyer comes through the hands of the buyer broker.
no, the buyer, I get what you're saying. It's just the other way around. The buyer is paying the buyer broker.
Okay,
The buyer's paying the buyer broker, right?
okay,
We are negotiating buyer broker concessions for the buyers.
okay.
So we're going to the seller and we're putting in the contract. Seller to credit buyer X amount at close of escrow to satisfy buyer's contractual agreement with buyer's broker. That's what we're putting in the contract. This is from EXP.
So, Renzo, por lo que entiendo, el comprador nos va a pagar nosotros con el dinero que el vendedor les va a dar a ellos
Exactly. So Sylvia, seller
para que nos
to
paguen.
credit the buyer, not the buyer broker, which is us. Seller to credit the buyer X amount at close of escrow to satisfy buyer's contractual agreement with the buyer's broker.
Okay, 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 I got it.
Does
I
that
got
make
it.
sense?
So,
Yeah.
lo
And
que
that
le
usually is
deberíamos
gonna be
es, entonces, ¿cómo podríamos manejar esa parte con los compradores? Digamos, no, que yo tengo que pagarte ahora. No, mira, el vendedor te va, te va a, digamos, pagar lo que tú me vas a pagar a mí.
In a way. So
Va a ser más literal, pues, más, y más directo.
yeah, and this is where it's gonna be a lot of trial and error, right? This is where we're gonna be learning as time goes on, what works, what doesn't work. For me, I'm gonna explain it is, hey, the way things have changed a little bit in the way we get compensated, right? The sellers can no longer pay the buyer broker directly. It has to come through you, right? Has to come through buyer concessions. So what this means is this buyer brokerage agreement, I'm going to be negotiating buyer broker concessions for the sellers, and that's going to be paying the compensation for the buyer broker agreement that we have. So that 2.5%, we're going to get concessions from the sellers to cover that. Okay. And then I'm going to be super transparent also with them. The truth is they just made it a little bit more complicated. And that's pretty much it. That's what I'm gonna be very transparent with buyers, because most educated buyers are aware of what's going on right now, right? They're like, hey, I've gotten so many calls from buyers. Hey, is this gonna affect how we do business? Is this gonna affect, can I still buy a home with you? Can I do this? Can I do that? Yeah, a few things have just changed in the way we get compensated. It just has to be worded a little different, and a few extra steps have to be taken into place. Right, JP.
So does this, to the extent that does this have to be written out as two separate concessions, or can this all be taken, how we do, buyer and seller agree, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Buyers, closing costs prepaids and or points. Can it all be like, hey, buyer and seller agree, can it be a one large percentage, or does it have to be separated to
It
fulfill buyer
It
broker, blah, blah, blah?
it very much could, and it very much could. Buyer and seller agree. Buyer will pay 6% towards buyer's closing costs, prepaids, points, and buyer's contractual agreement with buyer's broker. It could be all one thing. The way I'm thinking about it is I'm going to do that as one, and then I'm going to use this exact verbiage for the buyer concessions to start out with, just so it's very clear that buyer concessions are in you know, this is for buyer concessions, this is for buyer's closing cost prepaids, because then if you're mixing all that money together, it's still going to be the same because your buyer brokerage agreement is stating how much you're getting out of it. So it's kind of, I can't say for sure which one is better. I'm sure that you 100% can. I'm just gonna have it separate starting out. And then I'm gonna get, you know, seek some advice from Gil and other top producers and seeing what they're doing as well. But on the contracts, I'm gonna be putting it as two separate things starting out.
I will too. The simpler, the more simplified it is, the less likely confusion.
Exactly. And that's
And
and this is
yeah,
where we just have to be very prepared, educating our buyers in what's going on. Right. In the
I-
contract, we're gonna have to hold their hand through this and talk to them about this, right? And it's gonna be up to us to be able to explain this in a professional way to our buyers. Because this is gonna be an extra step we have to take, you know, to make sure everything is going smoothly in each transaction. JP, did you raise your hand again? Sylvia,
No, I can unraise it here.
how do you, okay, Sylvia.
we can do maybe a sideline conversation about this first part. It's that first part that's throwing me off because if I'm
This first
and
part is for a listing agreement. Sorry. This first part is for a
oh,
listing agreement.
okay. Okay.
Second part is
So
what you put in the contract after negotiations.
so if I'm telling the seller is willing to offer this a buyer broker concession of whatever, 3%, I don't know, 5%, I don't know, which can be applied towards the buyer's. I'm not going to talk that same conversation about my compensation as in the same conversation with the concessions for the buyer. That's well, no, it's just commingling the money. And I don't understand this part. Maybe I'm missing something. I think this is what's
So
hooking me up.
this is where you're if you're on the listing side and you're getting a listing agreement signed. That the seller is willing to offer buyer broker concession of X amount, which can be applied towards the buyer's closing cost prepaids or other allowable expenses. This is for a listing agreement. You're on the listing side, the first part.
Okay.
Okay. Now,
Okay.
again, when you get to contract, right, everything is negotiable again. So what's up,
Okay.
JP? When you get to contract, everything is negotiable. But what I'm trying to get clarity on is if we need to have this in the listing agreement to put this in the remarks of the MLS that the
Well, why
seller,
would we? Why would we? Because the listing agreement serves the purpose of clarifying what the listing agent will be compensated. And the only additional part is how much the seller, well, it's still there. Everything stays the same for the listing agreement. We're
the
just now educating them about this portion is my portion that you're paying me to compensate me for listing and marketing, blah, blah, of your property. And then they're confirming, as they always do, how much they would like to pay the buyer's agent for bringing a buyer.
yeah.
I don't think I
So
need to add anything.
so the thing is we don't have a tab where it says buyer agent commission. Right? So you know how we have those three tabs talking about transaction broker, single agent, and then non-representation.
But it's on the listing agreement. It says how would you like to, it gives me at the slot to put the percentage that I'm
That's
gonna
going to be
buy
taken
to
out.
pay
That's
the
what I'm
buyers.
saying. There's going
Oh,
to be
okay.
there's
I'm
going to
sorry.
there's
Okay.
going to be updated policies in the MLS where there's going to be no commission tab, and then they're going to be taking that out of the
Okay.
contract as well.
Now I
So
understand. Okay.
yeah, so that's where in the additional terms, I imagine is where we're going to have to put what the seller is willing to offer for buyer broker concessions. Okay. So first part's for listing agreement, and then when you're doing a contract on the buy side, seller to credit buyer X amount at the close of escrow to satisfy buyer's contractual agreement with buyer's broker. Again, you know, as time goes on, like JP said, we could add that all into one. And then we just explain to our buyer, hey, just letting you know, you're maybe getting 6% in closing costs, prepaids and total credit. 3 of that percent is coming to me as my compensation. Right. And then we need to be clear with them. Hey, what does a good deal look like? Getting your closing costs paid for is what, we're here to try and do. This is just another factor that it has to come through you for us to get compensated. Right. So there's going to be a lot of learning, right? But for more than anything, this is going to be a huge opportunity for us realtors to set ourselves apart, because the people who aren't aware, the agents who aren't aware, the agents who aren't going to know how to speak to their clients, they're going to be out of business.
Yeah. And
now there are a lot of people talking about a lot of different things. Like Ricky Carruth, he's on the extreme end. He's trying to get YouTube views. I used to take his information as Bible, but I kind of looked at what he's saying versus what EXP and the compliance of EXP is saying, and Ricky is kind of out there. And if you guys watch some of his videos, it's interesting. He's getting views, but it seems like he's trying to talk more to future buyers than he is agents. But anyways, not to bash Ricky Carruth, he's a great guy. But he's looking at things from a way more extreme standpoint. He's talking about commission pools potentially dropping about 30%, in a market, 20 to 30%. That's what he is kind of expecting. To me, it's going to weed out a lot of realtors, because a lot of realtors aren't going to know how to have this conversation. And when they have a bad conversation with the realtor and then we explain it to them confidently and smoothly, it's gonna be like, okay, now I understand. That makes sense, right? And we're gonna win over their business, right? It's just similar to when we talk about portability with listing agents or with sellers, right? Hey, I'm gonna educate you on this. Let's see if you get educated from any other realtor on this topic, right? So to be a top agent, we're gonna need to be able to convey this information in a professional way, where most agents won't be able to. So more than looking at this as a hindrance, this is truly an opportunity to set ourselves apart. Now, last thing that I want to go over, guys, is some of the common objections that I'm expecting to hear from buyers, right? And maybe we can role play these next week, or maybe even on Thursday. But the first one is, why do I need to sign a buyer broker agreement? That's going to be the one big objection. Why do I need to sign this? Right? We need to be able to explain it to them, right? And these are things I want you to think about throughout this week, and focus on these objections, because you're going to be hearing these more often than other objections in the coming weeks and months. The second thing, what if I want to work with another realtor at the same time? I really don't feel comfortable signing an agreement like this. I'm just unable to or do not want to commit to covering your fee. That's where the fear of them not understanding how the process works gets in the way, when I am unable or I do not want to commit to covering your fee. So we need to be very clear on how that fee is getting covered, right? So Sylvia, how is that fee getting covered? I'm curious. So if a client says, hey, I'm not willing to cover your fee, how is that fee getting covered?
I'm working with the seller or the buyer, obviously. Okay.
Yeah, you're working with, this is all buyer objections.
And they're not willing to cover my compensation for serving them.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Biden, it would be, I understand how you may come to that conclusion right now, but let me share just a little bit more background. When you purchased a home and you did have a home before, you did always, at any point in time, pay the buyer's agent who assisted you and worked hard to make sure your needs were met, except the payment of that came through the hands of the seller. So there was never, ever a time that you did not pay a real estate agent to assist you in purchasing your home. Again, it just came through the hands of the seller. So they've only just changed who is the person whose hands is being paid from. That's all. There's nothing really different. And I just want to share with you that they're giving you now that the funds into your hands after I negotiate the funds that they're going to give us. They're earmarking the same commission or compensation that you normally would come through the hands of the seller. They're earmarking it and giving it to you to pass to my hands at time of closing.
Yeah. Okay. That works as well, saying, hey, even before all of these changes, you were still paying, it was just coming through the hands of the sellers. Right? So that is one way you could definitely go about that, saying, hey, it's gonna be similar. JP?
Yeah.
You can go ahead, Sophie. You can finish before I go.
I was just gonna say, I think these people, period, buyers specifically, just need to understand there's not really a change. There's no option in anywhere in our society. I won't say it like this, but I will kind of change it up a little bit to make this point. In our society, you pay to receive services. That hasn't changed. We're just letting you know how it's going to flow, but the services and the compensation still remains the same. They just need to know that. It's just an education issue, I think.
Exactly. And that's the clearest way we can talk about this is say, hey, my job is to get the buyer, the sellers are going to be paying your buyer broker concessions. Typically, it could go directly, in the past, it could go directly from seller to buyer broker. Now it has to go from seller to buyer, then to buyer broker. That's the only change. That's a big difference there. JP.
My thought process for that was to say, hey, Renzo, I completely understand. And honestly, I don't want to cover my fee either. But I do want to let you know one quick thing is that I've been in real estate for just over 2 years at this point, and I have never once had a buyer pay for my commission.
Yep.
And I don't ever plan on making that happen moving forward. That's my commitment to you.
Yep.
I feel like that's a simpler way of it than if I'm in a position to be like, wait, what do you mean I've always been paying? You know what I mean? Like, to me, that makes it more confusing. And it doesn't, I don't know. I don't feel kind of like assurance in being like, oh, well, you've always paid for it. Like, what? So I've been lied to, you know what I mean?
So now buyers, it's also what we can say and what we can't say. Now, what you just said is going to work well to kind of soothe our buyers, right? Like, hey, in my past years and 4 years of real estate, I've never had a buyer pay my commission, right? And I have that same commitment to you right now. I'm here to get the seller concessions, or I'm here to get the seller to cover the buyer broker concessions. The only difference is the way that's distributed. Before it used to go from seller to buyer broker. Now it goes from seller to buyer to you paying the buyer broker fee, right? That's the only difference there. Because when they come and sign, most clients are going to be reading these buyer brokerage agreements and they're going to have these questions, right? They're going to come with even more objections. So as time goes on, we're going to be seeing how all of this unfolds. But JP, I think that's a good way of just being very clear and transparent with them is to be honest, I've never had a client pay my commission. It's always came from the seller. And as you said, that's my promise to you, right? So that's a good way. And then you can go a little deeper. The only thing that's changed is the process and way we get paid. That's the only thing that's changed. Right.
And yeah, I feel like that all is all ultimately just like every part of our process, like is gonna depend on what personality you're dealing with. If you
Yeah.
want to, if you're with a D personality that just wants results, listen, it's never happened, and that's my commitment to you. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? Boom. I'm giving you dominance back. If you're with a C personality, it's like, wait, but it says here
Yeah.
that I have to pay, then you break it down to the deal. But like,
Yeah.
I feel like all of this is just like everything else. It depends highly on who
Yeah.
we're dealing with.
And this is 100%, personality profiling is gonna depend, or it's gonna depend on how you explain it to them based off their personality profile, right? Now, another big thing is on the list side, we need to be very clear that we're gonna be offering concessions. We need to be very, very clear with that, right? With my listing agents, I say, hey, look, people might come in and try and negotiate, but I want you to know we're going to be paying buyer broker concessions, right? So having that early communication with our sellers is going to be crucial because they're going to hear all different types of things. Oh, I don't have to pay. And those are going to be some objections that we're going to be hearing in listing appointments. Hey, I heard I don't have to pay buyer agent commission. JP, what happens if we don't pay buyer agent commission?
I think it's very simple. And this is all going to depend, once again, like the rest of our listing is going to depend on what result you're looking to get. But the odds are that listing is probably going to sit on the market quite a bit longer. Just
If not,
because
indefinitely.
realistically, the whole reason is because we're pushing a lot of buyers out. Not necessarily about greed. It's not necessarily about real estate agents wanting to get paid, which of course we all do. Ultimately, at the end of the day, just like if interest rates were to go up another 3%, right? We're going to push a lot of buyers out from just being able to purchase the property, which is not ultimately what we want. We want to welcome as many qualified buyers as possible. And part of that is being able to assist, as we always have.
Yeah, precisely. And in easy terms, like no buyer, nobody, no buyer working with no realtor is going to bring their buyer to show your home. So I'm ready to sign a 1-year contract because yes, I'm gonna do my best to find the buyer, but most of the time it's another agent who brings a buyer to the table to buy a home. So if you want to do it this way, that's great. Let's sign a 1-year contract. And we'll do what we can to sell. We have good marketing, but most of the time another buyer's agent is gonna be showing the home. There's a lot that's going into this, guys. There's a lot of things that go into this, right? And there are going to be a lot more things that pop up as we learn more and more and as we actually practice this new style of business, right? So next month we're going to have another class. EXP should be having a third meeting talking about the NAR and updated policies and procedures and even some more objections that we're going to be hearing, right? Those were just four that I came up with. But there's going to be a lot more, right? Especially on the list side, on the buy side. So guys, this is to give you a good understanding, but a few takeaways that I want you to walk away with today is one, we're not showing homes without a buyer brokerage agreement. Okay. We're not showing homes without a buyer broker agreement. You're not getting paid without a buyer broker agreement. And it needs to be stated in the contract what the buyer agent concessions are. Make sense?
Mhm.
Perfect. Guys, that's it for today. I'll be getting this on the Montucci Group YouTube channel so we can review it. We're gonna have some future classes coming up on this topic, and we're gonna master this. No matter what, we are gonna master this. So we're the best and most educated agents out there, and this isn't gonna be more than more than just allowing us to have less competition in the marketplace. Because imagine a solo agent who doesn't have a team or doesn't have a broker who's giving them this support. What are they gonna do? What are they doing? Right? They're watching Ricky. I'm sorry, Ricky Caruth, but if they're watching Ricky Caruth videos, they're probably quitting real estate with the way he's talking. Right? So, guys, I'm excited about this opportunity. There's gonna be a lot more market share, I believe, that's gonna open up. You know, the Sharks, which is us, we are the Sharks. We're gonna be crushing it. It's just another thing that we need to master. But that's it for today, guys. JP, take care. Sylvia, I'm gonna get back to you a little later today, you know, kind of with what we talked about over the weekend. And that is it for today, guys. Let's see.
Renzo,